Imagine a city where rent won't bankrupt you, where a family can live in the city center without being millionaires, where the subway runs every 2 minutes, and where half the city is green space. That city isn't a futuristic utopia, it's Vienna. But how did this once imperial capital, stripped of empire and trapped between East and West, become the model of urban life the world looks to today? Vienna has been crowned the world's most livable city again and again. Mercer ranked it one for quality of life 10 years straight, and the Economist Intelligence Unit has placed it at the top 6 times since 2018. While London, New York, and San Francisco struggle with housing crises and broken transport, Vienna has kept living costs stable, built one of the best public transit systems in the world, and protected more green space than almost any other major city. How did a once-collapsing imperial capital reinvent itself into the gold standard of urban life? Today on Geologic, we'll uncover the policies, history, and bold decisions that made Vienna the best-run city in the world. If you're fascinated by stories of cities, culture, and the hidden forces shaping our world, make sure to subscribe to Geologic right now before we dive in. For centuries, Vienna was the shining jewel of Europe. As the capital of the Habsburg Empire, it was a city of music, power, and wealth. By 1910, Vienna had nearly 2 million residents, making it one of the largest cities in the world. Its boulevards echoed with waltzes, its palaces rivaled Paris, and its cafes brimmed with philosophers and artists. But then came 1918. The Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed at the end of World War I. Overnight, Vienna went from the beating heart of a 50 million strong empire to the oversized capital of a small republic with just 6.5 million citizens. The consequences were devastating. Vienna had been designed for an empire, but suddenly had no empire to sustain it. Cut off from Bohemian coal, Hungarian grain, and Balkan trade, the city fell into crisis. Tens of thousands of ethnic Austrians returned from lost territories, many with nothing. By 1919, 80,000 people were homeless, tuberculosis was rampant, and infant mortality was among the highest in Europe. Even Vienna's Ringstrasse, the grand boulevard built in the 1860s by Emperor Franz Joseph after demolishing the old medieval walls, stood as a cruel reminder of lost glory. Once lined with monumental symbols of power, the Parliament, State Opera, and Museum of Fine Arts, it now framed a city teetering on collapse. And beyond the Ringstrasse, the late 19th century had brought the Gründerzeit boom, a wave of speculative private development that filled the outer districts with uniform, 5-story courtyard blocks. Though built for profit, these structures gave Vienna a distinctive architectural rhythm and still define much of its character today. Compared to Berlin, which faced hyperinflation, or Paris, which still thrived on colonial wealth, Vienna looked doomed. Yet this crisis, as unlikely as it seemed, would open the door to one of the boldest urban experiments in modern history. In 1919, Vienna held its first truly democratic municipal election. The Social Democratic Workers' Party swept to power, determined to rebuild the city for ordinary people. 3 years later, Vienna was given a unique status. Like Washington, D.C. or Berlin, it became both a city and a province. This meant it could pass its own laws, collect its own taxes, and control housing policy. The result was revolutionary. Between 1923 and 1934, Vienna launched the largest municipal housing program in the world at the time. More than 64,000 new apartments were built, modern, affordable, and designed with dignity. These weren't grim concrete towers. They were called Gemeindebauten, vast residential blocks built around green courtyards, close to schools, clinics, and kindergartens. They had running water, central heating, and sanitation, at a time when many private homes in Europe did not. The most famous of them all was the Karl Marx Hof, stretching over a kilometer long with space for more than 1,300 families. To this day, it remains one of the longest residential buildings in the world. How did Vienna pay for this? Through progressive taxes. Luxuries like champagne, servants, and expensive hotels were taxed heavily to fund working-class housing. Rents were capped at just 3.5% of income, a number so low it sounds like science fiction to anyone paying rent in London or New York today. The results were immediate. Between 1923 and 1925, infant mortality dropped by an astonishing 40%. For the first time in Europe, decent housing and healthcare were no longer privileges for the elite. They became a right for the working class. And crucially, Vienna designed its housing system to stay inclusive over the long term. Even today, eligibility rules ensure apartments go to those who need them most, while income caps prevent ghettoization by keeping these neighborhoods mixed income and vibrant. Vienna proved bold housing policy could transform an entire city. What do you think? If your city capped rents at just 3 or 4% of income, would it work or would it backfire? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Compared to New York, where early public housing projects were tiny and segregated, or London, where slums persisted well into the 1930s, Vienna stood out. It became living proof that urban poverty could be beaten not with charity, but with policy. But this experiment, later called Red Vienna, would soon face forces beyond its control. Vienna's social experiment was bold, but history had other plans. By the early 1930s, political tensions in Austria were boiling. The left held Vienna, the right held the countryside. Then came the global Great Depression, crushing jobs and deepening divisions. In 1934, democracy collapsed. The Social Democrats were outlawed, and Vienna's housing revolution was halted. Just 4 years later, a far darker shadow fell. Nazi Germany annexed Austria in the 1938 Anschluss. Vienna lost its autonomy and was absorbed into Hitler's empire. World War II brought bombings and fierce street battles, but Vienna was lucky in one sense. It wasn't flattened like Dresden or Hamburg, nor firebombed like London or Tokyo. By 1945, most of its 19th century housing stock and monumental boulevards had survived. The bones of Red Vienna remained intact, but survival came at a price. When the war ended, Vienna found itself divided between 4 occupying powers: the US, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. The city center became an international zone, run by a rotating command of Allied officers. Unlike Berlin, there was no wall, no total split. But for a decade, Vienna was a pawn on the Cold War chessboard. The city stagnated. With borders closed to the east and cautious investors in the west, Vienna seemed frozen in time. Too eastern for the west, too western for the east? Yet this pause, this strange decade of waiting, would become a hidden advantage. Vienna hadn't modernized recklessly like many cities rebuilding from the rubble. Instead, it had the rare chance to observe and learn before making its next move. In 1955, everything changed. The Austrian State Treaty ended occupation, restored sovereignty, and declared Austria permanently neutral. This neutrality, once seen as weakness, soon became Vienna's strength. It made the city a safe, stable meeting ground between East and West. The United Nations, OPEC, and dozens of international organizations set up headquarters here. Vienna transformed from a city on the margins into a diplomatic hub of the Cold War, a role it still plays today. But Vienna wasn't just hosting diplomats, it was rebuilding itself from within. In the 1960s and 70s, the city poured money into housing estates on its outskirts and began laying the foundations of a modern subway system. By 1978, the first U-Bahn line opened, linking the historic Karlplatz to new districts. This investment in transit would become one of Vienna's defining advantages. At the same time, social housing expanded relentlessly. By the 1980s, the city had built more than 220,000 municipal apartments, enough to house nearly half its population. And unlike the public housing towers in places like Chicago or London, these communities were mixed income. Vienna didn't isolate the poor. It kept neighborhoods balanced, vibrant, and safe. The numbers tell the story. Today, about 60% of all Viennese live in subsidized or municipal housing. Compare that to London, where only about 17% live in social housing, or San Francisco, where affordable housing is barely 5%. Vienna wasn't chasing skyscrapers, free markets, or endless growth. It was building something slower but stronger, a city where stability, dignity, and affordability were built into the foundation. By the 1980s, Vienna faced a familiar urban problem. Developers were circling, speculating on land, and threatening to push housing costs upward. But the city had learned from history. Instead of letting the market run unchecked, it created something radical: the Land Procurement and Urban Renewal Fund, known locally as Wohnfonds Wien. Here's how it works. The city quietly buys land, old rail yards, unused hospital plots, even farmland on the edges of town. But instead of flipping it for profit, Vienna banks it. It holds that land until it's ready to build housing. And when it does, The land is leased only to nonprofit or cooperative developers. No luxury condo speculation. No billionaire ghost towers. Today, Vienna controls over 3 million square meters of reserved land for future housing. That's like having an entire Manhattan district locked away, not for hedge funds, but for ordinary families. The results are astonishing. Rents in Vienna average €9 to €11 per square meter. Compare that to €30 in Paris or €50 in Manhattan. A Viennese family spends about 25% of income on rent, while in London or San Francisco, that number can soar past 50%. This is Vienna's secret. Housing isn't just a commodity. It's treated as infrastructure, like roads or water pipes, something the city provides to keep life affordable. And that one principle keeps Vienna stable, even as global housing markets spiral out of control. If housing is the foundation of Vienna's livability, transport is the bloodstream. Few cities move people as efficiently, cheaply, and cleanly. Start with the U-Bahn, 5 subway lines, 98 stations, and trains running every 2 to 5 minutes during peak hours. That adds up to 400 million annual riders, the equivalent of every American taking more than one ride a year. Then the S-Bahn, a suburban rail network of 10 lines and 181 stations with 300,000 daily passengers. Add to that the tram network, 30 routes, over 1,000 stops, and 300 million annual riders. It's the 8th largest tram system in the world, filling in the gaps the subway doesn't reach. Combine this with 130 bus lines, and Vienna moves nearly 900 million passengers annually without relying on cars. And demand is still rising. In 2024 alone, ridership grew by 7% compared to the previous year. Tens of millions more trips taken in just 12 months. But here's the kicker: cost. Vienna's €365 annual pass lets you ride unlimited public transport for just €1 a day. A day pass is €8, a single ticket under €3. Compare this to London, where an annual pass can cost more than €2,800, or New York, where a Metro card is over €1,500 a year. The results are clear. 34% of trips in Vienna are by public transport, compared to just 25% by car. In the US, those numbers are flipped. 3/4 of trips are by car. Imagine paying just €1 a day for unlimited trains, trams, and buses. Be honest, would you use public transport more if your city had a system like this? Let me know in the comments. Vienna isn't just moving people efficiently. It's cutting traffic, reducing emissions, and proving that mobility can be affordable for everyone. What makes Vienna so livable isn't just homes and trains. It's that half the city is quite literally green. 53% of Vienna's total area is dedicated to parks, forests, or protected natural spaces. To the east lies the Livable wetlands, part of the Donau-Auen National Park, protecting the Danube's floodplains within the city limits. To the west rise the Vienna Woods, now a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, offering forests, vineyards, and hiking trails just minutes from the city center. Green space isn't optional here, it's policy. Every new housing development must include courtyards, playgrounds, or rooftop gardens. Car-free streets and tree-lined boulevards are standard. And Vienna's waste management is legendary. The city maintains 21,000 public bins and 1,200 ashtrays, with 600 MA48 employees dedicated solely to cleanliness. Drop trash illegally, and you'll pay a €36 fine. Keeping this machine running is MA48, Vienna's iconic waste management department. More than just garbage collection, it's a civic institution, so effective that Vienna is often compared to Tokyo for its spotless streets. Locals even joke, Vienna is as clean as Tokyo, just with better coffee houses. But Vienna doesn't just keep the streets tidy, it uses waste to power the city. More than 50% of district heating comes from waste incineration and renewables, turning garbage into energy. And the city has pledged carbon neutrality by 2040, a full decade ahead of the EU's official target. That's why Vienna consistently ranks among the world's greenest cities. It's not just an urban space. It's an ecosystem where nature, infrastructure, and daily life exist side by side. Yet statistics alone don't explain why Vienna feels so different. The soul of the city lies in its culture. This is the city of Mozart, Beethoven, and Freud. It's home to over 100 museums, the Vienna State Opera, and the Musikverein, whose Golden Hall is considered one of the finest concert venues on Earth. Every year, Vienna spends €130 per resident on culture, far more than Berlin, Paris, or London. That means museums, theaters, and music aren't just for tourists. They're woven into daily life. But culture here isn't confined to opera houses. It's also in the cafes. The Viennese coffee house, with its marble tables, newspapers on wooden racks, and slow pace of conversation, has been declared part of UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage. For generations, these cafes have been living rooms for the city, where politics, art, and philosophy mixed with coffee and strudel, and all of this rests on a foundation of safety and stability. Vienna consistently ranks as one of the safest cities in Europe, with low crime rates compared to Paris or Rome. It's a place where families can thrive, students can study, and immigrants can build a life without fear of being priced out or pushed aside. In Vienna, livability isn't abstract. It's the ability for an ordinary family to ride the U-Bahn to the opera, spend an afternoon in a park, and return to an affordable apartment in the heart of the city. That's what sets it apart. Vienna's story often sounds like a fairy tale, but no city is without challenges. The population has surged by more than 400,000 since 1980, fueled by both natural growth and immigration. Today, nearly 40% of Vienna's residents have a migration background, adding to the city's diversity, but also testing its ability to integrate new communities. Housing, while still affordable, faces pressure. Demand keeps rising, and even with land banking, the city must keep building to prevent shortages. Critics warn that waiting lists for subsidized housing are growing, and gentrification still creeps into some districts. Then there's climate change. Vienna's summers are hotter than ever, and heat waves threaten its vulnerable residents. Flooding along the Danube is another long-term concern. That's why the city is doubling down on its pledge for carbon neutrality by 2040. But achieving it will require constant innovation. And finally, competition. In recent years, cities like Copenhagen, Zurich, and Melbourne have challenged Vienna's dominance in global livability rankings. In 2025, Copenhagen even snapped Vienna's streak. The crown is no longer guaranteed. So the question remains, can Vienna continue to hold its place as the world's model city in an age of rapid urbanization, migration, and climate crisis? Vienna's rise wasn't inevitable. It was the product of choices, bold, controversial, and sometimes risky. Choices to treat housing as a right, to build transport for everyone, to preserve green space, and to invest in culture. While other cities tore themselves apart with speculation and inequality, Vienna quietly built a system where ordinary people could thrive. And that, more than anything, is why it's still held up as the best-run city on Earth. So next time someone says affordable housing is impossible or that public transit will never replace cars, remember, Vienna already proved it can be done. You've been watching Geologic, where history, cities, and culture come together to reveal the hidden mechanics of our world. If you enjoyed this journey into Vienna's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces shaping our past, present, and future.